Hello everyone, welcome back to my lab. Today I'm going to show you the new low-C Mini JRX2. Well guys, before I get to the content, I just wanted to take a second and say thank you very much for stopping in and taking a look at another one of my videos. And if this does benefit you in any way, do please consider giving me a thumbs up and a subscription. That would really help me out. Now, I don't normally like to show too much of the box here, but I would like to say that they've done a really good job with the packaging here, making this feel like a vintage model. And if you're not familiar, the JRX2 was an early low-C model that was available in the 80s. Now they've paid very good homage to this model here. They've tried to match the chassis very, very closely, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Now this is a Mini, they call it a 1/16 scale, but it is actually very close to a 1/18 scale, and I'll show you some comparisons with the Mini B in just a little bit. Now, because they are paying homage to such an older model, they've done that with the styling of the vehicle. You can see with the body, it mirrors the shape of the original one, as well as in the color scheming as well. Now, there are 4 body clips here, and I will suspect that most people won't use all 4 of these, but the locations are front and rear and on both sides of the model. And getting the body off of here can be a little bit cumbersome. You do kind of have to lift straight up in order to get the body off. If you try to twist or roll, it hangs up, so it'll kind of be in the way. The wing is attached to the body itself with this system here underneath. So if you want to remove this wing, these will twist and you can remove the wing out of the way. Now, getting our first look at the chassis, you can see that they still are paying homage to that older style of vehicle, but this is a much more open design than the low-C Mini T and the Mini B. Now, I like this because there's lots of room to add things. You don't have to be so concerned about sticking a smaller ESC or smaller receiver in these models. You really got a lot of room to play with. There's also quite a lot of room, as you'll see, for batteries. So if you want to go with big capacity batteries here, that's going to be pretty awesome to be able to add to this model. Now, the rear end of this model is where most of its vintage feel comes from. And looking close, you can see the trailing arms that they have here, as well as the lower arms, which don't seem like the more standard lower arm. This seems more like a turnbuckle than an actual lower arm. The shocks that they've included here are going to be a metal shock body with kind of an adjustable collar. This really is an old-fashioned way of doing things by loosening this collar and adjusting your ride height. The shock towers in this model are a fiberglass as well, but a little bit different material than the chassis, so they will look a little different from each other. Now, if you've seen my videos in the past, you've known that I have used my wife's Mini B from time to time in the channel, and I always like to extend a special thanks to her for letting me borrow it, and today is no exception. I have the Mini B and the Mini JRX2 here side by side for you to do a size comparison and see they are nearly identical to each other. The only small difference is that from the rear end here, I'm just lining up the wheels on my side of the table. You can see there's a slight bit of difference here in width between these two models. So again, doing the same thing, lining these up on this side. You can probably see here how this is just a shade bit wider. So that's one of the differences in there. And I did mention all of the extra space that there is in the chassis. So if you see the two differences here, you can see what I mean. There's quite a lot of extra room here in this model, so that's really convenient for add-ons and upgrades. Now, for measurements, the Mini JRX2 comes in at 6 3/4 wide in the front end and 7 1/4 wide in the rear end, so these are a bit wider at the back. Now, the wheelbase in the Mini JRX2 is about 7 1/4 inches long and about 3/4 inches in ground clearance. Now, another difference between the Mini JRX2 and the Mini B is that the tire diameter is a shade bit taller at 2 5/8. Now, for the electronics in this model, they have changed those and for the better as well. So there's a new 2-in-1 motor and ESC unit here. That's a Dynamite branded one at 25 amp ESC. The battery is much the same, a 650 milliamp lithium polymer battery. The servo, the SX107, and the rear mounted motor this time instead of a mid mounted motor. I think it's very much the same motor, just going to be a new badging and new branding. Now, one step down in the Mini JRX2 is the driveshaft material. So gone are the metal drive shafts from the Mini T and the Mini B, and they've done a plastic telescoping shaft. But it does look like there is a metal universal joint in here, so that should help with the durability. There's also a clear gear cover here, so you get a better look at the gearing that's in the model. Another difference that they have made in the two models is their wheel and tire options. Now, unfortunately, this means that you won't be able to interchange the wheels and tires between the two models. Now, if you look close at the tires from the Mini JRX2, you can see these support a bearing for their roll, and the ones from the Mini B actually support a drive hex. They've done kind of the same thing at the rear end, so the ones in the Mini B have a drive hex in the rear, and the ones in the JRX2 use the old style drive pin. Another thing that's different is the wheel nut options here, so you can see how much larger the wheel nuts are for the JRX2 versus the Mini B. So they have made a lot of changes in those areas as well. Now, the one thing I will say that I'm not a big fan of in the Mini JRX2 is because these are bearings in the wheels, when you're tightening the wheel nuts, you're going to find that as you're tightening this wheel nut up here, because the axle is firm inside the wheel, you can see the amount of flex that the A-arm has to take on here in order to tighten up those wheel nuts. So as a tip, I would recommend when you're tightening these, hold this in place so that when you're tightening, you're not putting undue stress here. By contrast, when you tighten up the ones on the Mini B, you're holding the wheel and you're tightening against the wheel. So when you're looking at that comparison's sake, you'll see that as I'm tightening, there is absolutely no twisting happening on the car itself because all the stress is on the wheel. Now, as I was taking off the wheels and tires in the model, I did encounter something that was kind of unexpected, but not necessarily a bad thing. So when you look close at the underside of the JRX2, you can see that the pivot points here are more of that kind of pivot joint here. And if you're pretty rough with these, and I noticed this when I was taking the wheel and tire off, that these will pop off of here fairly easily. I didn't take a lot of force to do that. So this will be something that may pop loose when we're hitting things hard, but with as easily as this one is coming loose, it might be coming loose while you're driving, because again, you can see how little pressure I'm putting on that. Now this one over here is a bit more secure, so as I'm pushing on it, you see I'm putting a lot more force on it, so it might be something mismolded in this component here. But I still think it's worth something mentioning to you when it comes to the way that the car is assembled. Now, I will say that from a radio standpoint, the Mini JRX2 hands down has the better controller. The SLT2 platform is going to be a much more rigid controller. It's going to be a lot more durable. The batteries are not hidden underneath this thing that you have to push loose and possibly put this in here backward. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people put this thing in here backward. So I really do like the controller much better, but there is one major downside with this controller in that it does not like to stand like this. It's very unstable. You see how when I go to put it up here, it wants to fall over. If you take your time and properly line this up, it will stand, but I'm really nervous. I'm not taking my hands very far away from this because I'm nervous it's going to fall. But they're not intending for you to put it in this position. They're intending for you to put it in this position. This has these two little teeth marks right here and this flat space here. This is the way they're intending for you to put the controller. So that's something that's worth noting if you've never worked with controllers before, that a lot of manufacturers are moving more to that design where you're going to be putting the controller in this position, because if it does fall, it's far less of a distance for it to fall than if it's going to fall this way. Now, as I'm comparing these two models, I'm noticing that there's a question that's popping into my head. And that question is if I'm only going to buy one of these, which one do I buy? And the one that I would buy is pretty simply the Losi Mini B. And this is largely because of the way that I do hobbies. I do hobbies in a way that lets me upgrade them, that lets me build them. I enjoy that process more than I do the driving. And if you watch my videos, you'll see there's not many videos of me driving RC vehicles. It's mostly the how-tos and the tech end of things. And since I enjoy that aspect much more, the Losi Mini B is going to have my attention. Now, that's not to say that things won't change when it comes to the JRX2, and I really hope that they do. I really do enjoy this model. I really do like the way that it's built. I love the throwback to the early days of hobby-grade RC. And as the upgradability comes around for that model, my opinion will probably change because I really do like what they have done with the JRX2. Now, the biggest letdowns for me on the new JRX2 is the wheels and tires are not standard, and that's a big letdown because all the things that are on the market already for the Mini B and the Mini T, for that matter, they are not going to fit on the JRX2, and that's a big bummer. Well guys, as we put a wrap on this video, I hope you've enjoyed taking a look at the new JRX2 and how much of a great addition this is to the Losi lineup. Personally, I'm very excited about this vehicle. I was not in the hobby when this vehicle was around, so I have no nostalgia attached to this, but I still think it's very cool. And if you have benefited from this video, or if you've enjoyed or learned anything, do please consider giving me a thumbs up and a subscription. Also, don't forget to hit that bell. This way you don't miss any of my new content as it goes up. Well, that'll wrap it up for this one, and I really do hope to see you in the next one.